Hi, I'm Mark Clegg for the Photographer Academy, and we're talking about to soften or not to soften in boudoir photography. In a recent 2-day workshop where we were doing the post-production at the end of each day, one of the biggest questions on day one was basically, how much softening should I apply? Should I apply softening to an image or all images, and when to apply it and so on with it? For me, I like to apply a softness no matter what in the likes of the raw processor. And this is done in the case of texture in a negative slider. And this kind of just knocks out any of the sharp detail of the skin. And it also kind of adds a little bit like a foundation kind of blur, as if kind of makeup was being applied throughout the whole body and so on with it. But it's a good way to actually just soften down any of the skin blemishes as well and things. As far as the clarity slider is concerned, if we're talking about whether we're working on RAW files or JPEG files, of course, I'd always recommend you to work on RAW files because you can maintain the data, the detail there, and obviously in the post-production you can decide on what to lose and what to keep and things. Anyway, in the clarity, that tends to affect the mid-tone sharpness, which can end up giving you a little bit of a real surface blur effect, which can be a little bit too much, I think, at times with skin. Obviously, once we've applied it to the raw file, we can go back and actually readjust that if that's what we want. But when I'm processing the original raw files into the JPEG file that I'm going to be showing the client, and even if I'm going to be going into the like of the post-production in Photoshop, I usually do all the images saved to JPEG 10. And then basically I'll do the work on the image and then basically resave it to minimize any of the data that is lost. But in JPEG, remember, we're always working on a lossy file. If I'm going to do the work in the likes of Photoshop, as far as to soften it, I tend to actually give it a little bit more of a glow effect then. So I'll duplicate the layer. I'll basically then add a Gaussian blur to the layer so it's almost undistinguishable. And then I actually use a blend layer to kind of soften the whole kind of look down. And then basically, as far as the opacity is concerned, that's going to be to do with what I feel it needs to be done as such, really. So let's quickly look at those techniques anyway in the likes of RAW. So just kind of had a selection of images here, and basically this is kind of quite common from a shoot and things. Let's open these up into RAW. These are already a JPEG file, by the way, but we've still got the ability to soften the files. So if we were to kind of just zoom in on the skin here, and we're looking at the kind of the dimples and the kind of the marks, and kind of all bodies are different, isn't it, really? And it doesn't mean that we're trying to disguise or hide things. We're just trying to give a kind of a real fantasy glow. So what I would do is basically under the texture slider here, I mentioned I would work in a negative, and this is affecting just the textures. It will affect hair as well. And remember, you do have the ability, if you want to go into the mask tool and basically click onto the subject or allow Photoshop AI to find the person. And then basically within it, I can actually then go in and remove or kind of soften down everything else with it. Let's just do that again for you. Okay, so let's kind of go into an image. So we've got two options. One is going to be remove the texture. That kind of comes down onto the actual skin. If I was to use the clarity, this adds much more of a mid-tone kind of blur sharpness onto the image, something that I kind of try and avoid. So I try and just use the texture down. But of course, if I want to actually work in the mask, you can see because it's boudoir at this point, there's no face visible. It can't really distinguish the person as such. And this is where you're either going to click on subject or in the brush tool itself. That's when we scroll down then and basically put the minus texture once more. And then if we just, let me just zoom out a little bit. And then if we kind of go in and we start to paint on the actual texture blur onto the skin, this is where we can apply it just to the areas that we want and things. It's a lot easier in the likes of portraiture when it can identify somebody. So in other words, we're zoomed out here, we're just seeing that little bit of a chin of the subject it identifies them as a person. We click onto the person at that point. Let the AI find the parts that we want, and I want facial and body skin, and I'm going to apply it to both of those elements. So I'm not going to create two separate masks. I'm just going to click on create. And then what I'm going to do is scroll back down again to the texture, and we start to actually remove that down again. Okay, so that is basically now working on that image. But if you wanted to work fast, of course, across all your images, you could, especially in boudoir photography, if you're doing a lot of faceless stuff, you can actually just click into the effects menu here, and then grab the slider, the texture, and basically dial the texture down to about -80, and that's going to work pretty good for the actual skin and things. And if you noticed here, I selected all three of these images. So I mentioned if I wanted to work with this in Photoshop instead, let's just take the texture off for a minute. So I just double click on that slider, resets it. Let's open this up in Photoshop. So then we go into duplicate the image, Control J, of course. Then we go up into filter, blur, and Gaussian blur. And as I said, it's pretty much indistinguishable as far as the kind of the skin is concerned. That's really what we're looking for as far as the blur technique, to kind of really give it that haze. The more, obviously, the more glow you're going to get. Going to press OK to that. Then we just work into the likes of the soft light, and that will give the glow, but it will also add the contrast in. You could also go into screen, which kind of keeps us away from the actual the contrast increase with it. And then if we just scroll in, then let's just go to Control Plus to zoom in, and we start to actually look at the actual skin on the actual body there. You can see the difference that it's made. But of course, you might want to bring some of the detail back in. That's what I was saying to you, kind of reducing down the opacity and so on with it. Remember, at this stage, of course, if we just switch that one off here, and we go back to the background, the original layer, Control J that again. And then if we were to come up into filter and we go into camera raw. So if you want to apply the softness, like the texture softness that I was showing you before, but you're within Photoshop, we can do it here. I would recommend that you do convert first of all to a smart filter first, because that will make it editable. And you can define what is a smart object or a smart filter by that little icon on the thumbnail. Then we just go into the filter and the camera raw. And then we go up into the texture slider once more, and we kind of just slide that down again to about our 80%. So let's double click onto the slider to remove it, so you can see what we've got here. And then we can reduce the textures down as we're going through it, pressing OK. But of course, if we're working in this way, it means that we're working on one image at a time in Camera Raw, instead of working on all the files in the likes of Camera Raw together, or if you use Lightroom, of course, in exactly the same way. So for me, softening is a thumbs up. But again, some bodies are going to need a little bit more or a little bit less. It depends on the kind of skin finish that you've kind of discussed with your client.